Like I said earlier, this is our last week in our series Resilient, looking at the life of Joseph. And we've been talking about, hey, if there's anybody who knows about hardship and difficult times, it's Joseph, right? He was forced into slavery, falsely accused of a crime, unjustly thrown into a pit in an Egyptian prison, forgotten about. This guy knows about difficult times. He's been through so much, and yet he's standing strong. He's being resilient through all of these difficult times. Now, just to summarize the previous weeks and some of the things that you and I have learned about what it means to be resilient. The first thing is that we need to trust in the good judgment of God. We need to trust that God will make all things right. And that frees you and I from a sense of trying to get revenge or retribution or to hold on to bitterness. God will make things right. The second thing we learned was about the presence of God. That Jesus, that he left this earth, but he sent the Holy Spirit. And that you and I, those of us who follow and trust in Jesus, have been given his presence to be with us no matter what we go through. Then we learned in the third week about the empowerment of God, that we need the empowerment of the Holy Spirit. We need strength that only he can give in order to make it through the most difficult times. And then last week we learned about wisdom, the wisdom of God, and that we need that in order to have the guidance and to be able to navigate this difficult life. But there's one more thing that I think you and I need, or one more thing at least that we can glean from the life of Joseph. There's one more lesson I think you and I should examine. So Joseph, at this point of the story, right, he's the number one guy in Egypt. The only person that's above him is Pharaoh himself, right? He's actually overseeing all of the plans of all the cities and the food distribution that's happening there. Now, food distribution? If you don't remember, Joseph is in this position because there was a dream that he interpreted that there would be 5 plentiful years of farming, of harvest, which came to pass. But after that would be 7 bad years of famine and drought and difficulty. And so where we find ourselves in this story is year 2 of that famine. And Genesis says at this point, after 2 years of famine, the entire world, which they really mean region, but the entire region all around Egypt was beginning to come to Egypt in order to find food. Well, sure enough, the most unlikely people show up at Joseph's doorstep. And that's where you and I will pick up in Genesis chapter 42, looking at verse 1. This is what it says. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? I've heard," he said, "that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us there, that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he feared that harm might come to him. Thus the sons of Israel were among the other people who came to buy grain, for the famine had reached the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land. It was he who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. So Joseph, he was just 17 when he was sold into slavery by his brothers. Now 22 years have passed. He's no longer that boy. He's now a 39-year-old man. And now he's ruling Egypt. Now listen, Jacob's brothers, Jacob's father, Jacob, the father of Joseph, hears that there's grain in Egypt, and so he sends 10 of the 11 brothers. Funny that he doesn't trust these older brothers with the youngest son again, right? But here they are bowing before the brother that they betrayed. Again, those of you who know the story well know this is actually a dream that Joseph had when he was very young that caused his brothers to actually hate him. Now, there's some back and forth that happens in this story. But Joseph recognizes them even after all these years. Now, they don't recognize Joseph, but he sees them and he knows who they are. And he sends them away and he makes them bring back his other brother. So here they are, all 11 brothers standing before Joseph. And so here's the question. If you had been hurt to the degree that Joseph was hurt, how would you treat these brothers? See, the tables have turned. When he was 17, they were in power, right? They were the ones in control. They betrayed him, they sold him off. But now he has the power, right? He's in control. He can do whatever he wants to them. And what does Joseph do? He does, the compassion that he shows is going to show you and I something. It's something about how to be resilient in difficult times. So let's jump to Genesis chapter 45 and we'll see what happens. Genesis 45:1. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. So Joseph reveals himself to them, and in doing so, his emotions overwhelm him. He starts sobbing, he starts crying so loudly, even the Pharaoh's household hears him. Joseph is experiencing a deep level of pain in this moment. Listen, I think there's something that our culture doesn't do very well with, and that is the grieving and healing process. It's not something that we're always taught how to do very well. And so I'm just going to say, if you've been hurt by someone or betrayed by someone, I want to encourage you right now to give yourself space to grieve and to mourn over that. To express your hurt, really even in a physical way. This is part of the process in which we heal. Joseph is a strong man, not in spite of his tears, but because he has the courage to let it all out. He weeps. He cries out. That's part of the healing process. So let me ask this one last time. Or say it one last time, sorry. It's okay to weep. Jesus wept in a difficult moment in his life. And you and I, we can weep in response to the difficulties we face. Let's continue on in this passage. Genesis 45, verse 3. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." Okay, we'll pause here for just a moment. They were anxious, right? They were fearful or dismayed at this revelation that this brother that they had betrayed is now standing before them. They don't know what to do. I mean, they were just bowing down to him, right? He's in control of the food in this land, and they are in Egypt. He can do whatever he wants to them at this point. These murderous brothers, they're powerless, and he is powerful. So what's he going to do to us? That's the question I think is in their minds. Again, to be resilient means that we don't need to seek revenge on those who have hurt us. And that's not what Joseph's going to do. In fact, what we see here is he's going to end up doing something that's amazing. He realizes that actually seeking revenge and holding on to bitterness, that actually ends up just hurting you and I more. And Joseph knows that. And so that's not what he does. We're going to continue on. Look at verse 5. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing or harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. Joseph recognizes the sovereignty of God in their lives. He's saying, listen, don't be fearful or dismayed. I know what you're thinking about. You're thinking about your actions, but I see that God has taken your actions and he's used them for his good and for keeping his promises. He's saying he sees that God is sovereign over all. In fact, he articulates this a little while later in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. He says, "Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today." Okay, again, he recognizes that God's hand is in all of this. And this passage in some ways foreshadows what Paul would later say in Romans 8:28, which can often be misused and sometimes it's overly used in cliche ways, but it's still true. And this is what it says: "We know that all things work together for good, for those who love God, who are called according to his purpose." Paul's writing to the church in Rome, and he's telling them God's working things out. Not just the good parts, not just the happy parts, but all things. God is going to use it all. Do you see how Joseph and Paul were on the same page? They're saying God is ruling and reigning in their life, and even in the difficult moments of their lives. Even when they feel alone and feel abandoned, when they feel like everything is out of control, they recognize, no, he's with us, and he is still in control. Joseph believed this, and so should you. God is in control no matter what. God is going to work all things out. Joseph believed that. He looked at his brothers and said, "You meant this for evil. You sold me into slavery." And yes, God allowed it, but he used it. And because he did that, so many lives will be saved. He wants them to see. People from all over the world are coming to Egypt and coming to him, and their lives will be saved because Joseph remained resilient as God slowly but surely put him into a place of leadership and influence. I'll say it again. God is in control no matter what. And Joseph clung to that truth. In Potiphar's house, he clung to that. In prison, he held on to that. And as he was forgotten in prison even longer, I believe that Joseph had to have believed that. God is in control no matter what. So listen, if you're struggling right now, maybe you need to hear these words too. God is in control no matter what. Listen, those people, they might have meant it for evil. They might have meant it to hurt. But listen, God can and will take those evil acts, those intentions for harm. He has power over them and can transform them and bring life through them. He's working all things out for our good and for his glory. But how does this work out in our lives? I mean, it's nice to say, right? But how can this give us the strength that you and I need? How can this truth help us to be resilient? Practically. Well, I have a few points of advice, okay? The first is this. My first bit of advice is to lean into God. What does that mean? It means this. When we go through challenging times, when things get difficult, or when you and I are in pain, we tend to push God away. I think our base reaction is to put our hand out and hold God at a distance and say, "I'm mad at you because you're allowing me to go through this thing," right? We tend to say, "How could you?" And we hold God at a distance. But listen, if you're going through a difficult season or if one's ahead, you need to lean into God. And a couple of things are going to happen. The first is you're going to find that he comforts you. Unlike anything else, God's ability to give you comfort and hope is unparalleled. You'll know what it's like to have a Father in heaven who's holding you and comforting you. You'll also know this, that we will learn so much in difficult seasons. I think we all know this. We know it's true, even if we don't really like it, that it's in the uncomfortable and challenging seasons in life that we actually have this space to grow and to change. C.S. Lewis put it this way: God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. He will not only comfort you, he will teach you. And have you ever noticed when we go through difficulties and hardship, there's opportunity there? Now listen, I don't think God wants bad to happen to you and I, but we live in a broken and fallen world. And even in the midst of difficulty and challenges, there's opportunity. Even when it comes to our personal relationships, when somebody harms you or hurts you or betrays you, there's opportunity to show grace and forgiveness. And that opportunity wouldn't be there unless there had been an offense to begin with. There's an opportunity. You have an opportunity to show others and show this world what grace and forgiveness looks like through your actions. I think there's opportunity even when we have been hurt. And I think that kind of reaction is what our world desperately needs right now. In the same way that Joseph's brothers, after 22 years, desperately needed grace and forgiveness from Joseph. So the first is you and I need to lean into God. The second thing I think is we need to have a long view of God's faithfulness. Friends, this was a process that took 22 years for Joseph, right? I mean, how many sleepless nights must he have had, wondering if he would ever see his father or his brothers again or his homeland? I wonder. 22 years. And often we see in scriptures that there's this promise that God is working, but the time between the promise and when we see, when the people who are living it can look back and see that promise and see God's faithfulness, it's a lot longer than any of us would like, okay? I think we often wish that God would work at our speed, right? On our timetable. We're like, hey, I've been quarantining for long enough. I want things to go back to normal. I want things to look like they used to, and I'm tired of seeing the same people or being in the same place, and I'm over it. You know, we are looking at things in terms of weeks and months, and we need to understand that our timetable, we need to grow in our patience. And so that's what we do. I mean, when we think about it, Joseph, again, 22 years. You and I need to patiently wait on the Lord to reveal his good plans. Listen, patiently waiting is part of the Christian faith, okay? We have this already. Like, we believe in this faith where we have something, but not fully, right? We have this faith in Jesus and his kingdom, which was inaugurated at his resurrection, but we have to patiently wait in this broken and dying world for him to come back and make all things right. So just built into the DNA of the Christian faith is a long view, right, of God's faithfulness. Joseph trusted 22 years, and then he looked back and he could say, I knew God was up to something great. And listen, I'm telling you, if you patiently wait, if you are patient, you will see that too. And that's not always a welcome message when we're right in the middle of it, right? When we're feeling pain and discomfort and things are confusing and overwhelming. That's not a message we want to hear. But I'm telling you, it's true. So we need to have a long view of God's faithfulness. The third thing I think is this: we need to have a living hope. Hope is something that we desperately need right now in our broken world. If there's no light at the end of the tunnel, well, that makes our hearts end up being pretty dark and cynical, okay? If you don't believe at the end of the days that God will come back and make all things right, man, listen, I think we need Jesus. because he is our living hope. We have this hope, and it's not a dead hope. It's not a hope buried. It is a living hope. That Jesus is going to reconcile all things. That King Jesus will come and power and glory, and that evil and death and pain and sorrow and brokenness will be no more. That his kingdom will be made realized in a new earth that will not pass away. In fact, you look at the story of Joseph, if you take a step back and look, you will see that the story of Joseph is a foreshadowing of Jesus. It's a gospel story. Think about it. Jesus was betrayed by his brothers and by humanity, right? The disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees and Pontius Pilate. They all in their sin and brokenness betrayed Jesus. And the rulers and the authorities, they meant evil for him. They wanted him dead. And God allowed this evil to take place, for Jesus to be arrested and falsely imprisoned, just like Joseph, to stand trial and be found guilty for a crime he did not commit, just like Joseph, and to be thrown into a pit. I mean, for Joseph, it was a prison in Egypt, and for Jesus, though, it was the ultimate sentence, which was death. The prison was the grave, just like Joseph. But just like Joseph, God's plan was to save lives, to save as many as possible. So God raised Jesus from the grave and put all authority under him, just like Joseph. He lifted him to the right hand of the Father, just like Pharaoh placed Joseph in authority. Do you see it? And he did this so that all who would come to Jesus with empty hands and in need of help might be saved, just like we see Joseph's brothers bowing before him in need. Do you see it? This is the gospel that we have placed our hope in, that we know we can place our hope right now. And I think some of you, maybe that's where you need to be, is you need to release control and you need to recognize that you are not in control and you never were. But the one who is ultimately in control is good. He's a good Father who loves you and who you can trust to provide for you through his Son, Jesus Christ. We're going to go back into our time of worship. When we come back, I'm going to pray for all of us as we end this series, that God would help us to take these truths and make them a reality in our minds and in our hearts, that you and I can stay resilient. We'll be right back.